Story number 1.
This weekend, I made the decision to take a brief escape from my busy family life. I took my kids on a trip far away from the city to immerse ourselves in the Alaskan wilderness. We spent time fishing, hiking, and relaxing with songs around the campfire. My spouse and I often discussed the need to be apart, and I took the initiative to make it happen. Hopefully, she can get some much-needed rest during our absence. The trip to the river took about 9 hours, but here we are. Surrounded by a beautiful forest, various animals, chirping birds, and a seemingly endless river. I instructed the kids to unpack and gather firewood while I myself set up the tent, laid out sleeping bags, prepared fishing gear, and made sure we had plenty of fish bait. As I was laying out the fishing rods, evening crept up on us, and I realized that my kids, ages 7 and 8, were already playing by the fire. "When are we going to eat?" They asked. Hastily rummaging through my backpack, I pulled out sausage, cheese, bread, potatoes, and sandwiches. "Let's cook together," I suggested, handing the potatoes to my daughter. The evening passed quickly, almost without sleep. I fished, and the kids ran around telling spooky stories, trying to scare me. The next day was just as enjoyable. We boated, fished, and made soup. The original plan was to stay until morning, but an unexpected downpour forced us to quickly pack up and head home. The return trip was a long one. The road was almost impossible to see due to the bad weather conditions. "Why don't we stop by Grandma's house? She's 10 minutes away," I suggested to the kids. They agreed, and I turned to her house. All our clothes were damp. We were all freezing from the strong wind. The rain continued to pour down like a bucket. Upon entering the house of my mother-in-law, whose name was Barbara, she was terribly frightened as she was not expecting guests. "Grandma, hello. We've come to visit you," shouted the children, hugging her with wet hands. I told my mother-in-law the whole situation that had happened to us. She prepared dry clothes for us, fed us, and put the children to bed. I sat by the fireplace, unable to warm up. Drink quickly, she handed me a glass of whiskey and immediately poured it into my mouth, and I did not even have time to ask what it was. Glass after glass, Barbara tried to rub me to warm me up, but all to no avail, and I was shivering like a hare that had seen a wolf. Barbara pressed her body against mine to transfer the warmth. How sudden! My mind went fuzzy, and I distinctly felt that her hands were not in a comfortable place at all. "Something in the atmosphere got hot," I said, trying to stand up and move away from her. "It's not as hot as it could be yet," she said, pouncing on me. While the kids slept on the second floor after a nice nature walk, my mother-in-law gave me her warmth, lying by the fireplace. She was unstoppable. She was so hungry, like she was 20 years old. So we came to visit to warm up. What's gotten into her? I thought, what demon has possessed her? Probably, it is loneliness. A woman cannot be without a master in the house. My mother-in-law looks very young for her age. I don't understand why she won't find a second husband. The next day, we packed up and drove home. Barbara walked us to the car, kissed us, and smiled very slyly. She told me in my ear that she would be waiting for me to visit her again, preferably alone. Just like that, unexpectedly, my mother-in-law and I now have a sweet secret. As long as no one knows, we will have fun.
Story number 2.
We had the pleasure of arriving at the country villa early in the morning with my mother-in-law. There was no traffic, it wasn't hot, and it was very comfortable. We did chores all day, showered as darkness fell. Mother-in-law would set the table, and I would make baked hams from the meat. My mother-in-law was a pleasure to be with. We talked and drank together. Admittedly, I admired her both as a person and her beautiful figure and very large breasts. Sometimes from the second floor, I would watch her bent over working in the garden, and I loved what I saw. I openly told everyone that if my mother-in-law was younger, I would prefer to live with her rather than with my wife. She had a fiery temper, and on the summer veranda she was preparing appetizers while I stayed outside fighting mosquitoes and grilling sausages. The sausages were almost ready when two familiar mother-in-laws who lived on the neighboring property came running in at the delicious aroma. They were two friends of my mother-in-law, both about the same age and slim in appearance. They greeted me and went straight to my mother-in-law's house. I entered the house just as they were about to leave. My mother-in-law wasted no time in informing me that she had received an invitation to a birthday party and simply could not refuse. In response, I suggested that she at least distract herself and get some rest, and I would save a piece of meat for the next day and go to bed as I was feeling a bit tired. Without delaying, my mother-in-law hurriedly dressed, while I discreetly slipped $50 into my pocket and went upstairs, bringing a bottle of champagne and a few pieces of meat with me. I slowly savored my drink, gradually getting into a more festive mood. Suddenly, I heard the gate creak open. It was my mother-in-law, accompanied by her friends, whom she thanked profusely for a delightful evening. From the sound of her voice, she had clearly enjoyed herself. I came down the stairs, intending to help her to bed, but she declined, expressing her desire to continue the party. Naturally, I welcomed such a lively mother-in-law, as I was not averse to having fun myself. We sat down at the table and started talking about various topics. My mother-in-law confessed her loneliness to me, and I gave her a helping hand and poured her another drink. Suddenly she exclaimed, "Why are we just sitting here? Let's put on some music and dance." Without thinking, I chose a slow tune, took my mother-in-law's hand, and we began to dance. As we moved together, my mother-in-law snuggled closer and closer to me, perhaps feeling slightly dizzy or for some other reason. Our dance was unusually graceful, and when our eyes met, a spark passed between us. At that moment, everything became clear, and I no longer hid my feelings. I realized that the next morning I would be ashamed. However, in the back of my mind, I also realized that this could be my first and last opportunity, which I took. The next morning, my mother-in-law took a long shower. She came out of it refreshed and satisfied. The only hint of our night of dancing was in her gait. She couldn't remember what had happened after she was brought into the house. I assured her that she had simply gone to bed. Uncertainty plagues me at times. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Should I disclose what actually happened to my mother-in-law after she was brought into the house and, as I claim, she just went to bed? Or is it wise to remain silent? Please advise me on the best way to proceed. I am tormented by the thought that she will remember what happened, and then I will feel bad.
Story number 3.
My wife called me while I was at work. "On your way home, stop by my mom's house and set up the washing machine for her," she said with annoyance. I always try to avoid arguments with my wife to maintain a peaceful family life. Besides, I am quite handy and know a lot about machines. Besides, my mother-in-law is a single woman who has been divorced for 9 years. How will she get along without a man's help? I quietly grumbled to myself and went to her house. As usual, my mother-in-law greeted me without much enthusiasm, but at least she spared me the boring conversation. She had to be kind to me in some way, since I was taking time away from my own child. I walked into the kitchen, assessed the situation, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. In just 30 minutes, I was done. As I was about to leave, my mother-in-law stopped me and told me that she needed to do the laundry, but she was afraid she'd do something wrong or press the wrong button. I nodded understandingly, and she brought me the dirty laundry to put in the washer. As I was about to cross the threshold, she stopped me again. "Let's wait for the washing machine to finish its cycle." "I don't want to ruin anything," my mother-in-law said. I agreed and sat on the couch, leafing through a magazine, waiting for the laundry to finish. My mother-in-law joined me, sitting with her arm carelessly behind her head, and we started chatting. She offered me tea, and I gladly accepted the offer. As we talked, the tension between us dissipated, and we found ourselves enjoying each other's company. My mother-in-law and I rarely spend time together, and unfortunately, we have never been able to find common ground. If we do manage to see each other, it's usually in passing or in crowded places. But this time we were alone. Just thinking about it made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't figure out why. On the other hand, she seemed confident and calm. "Do you want me to show you an Oriental dance?" she asked. I was taken aback and almost choked on my tea. "What dance?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "What? Didn't my daughter tell you that I take Oriental dance classes?" Her surprise seemed genuine, as if my wife and I had no other topics of conversation but her. I nodded and replied, Yeah, she mentioned something like that." My mother-in-law smiled and went into the next room, calling out from there, "I need to change into my clothes for the dance." I replied, Okay. And as I watched her, I couldn't help but think, "You're being silly. After all, you're already 58 years old, and even though you look trim, dancing is too much for you." But I decided to be patient and just observe. I turned on the music, and she came running into the room. And that's when my jaw dropped. For starters, she's out barefoot. She wore metal bracelets with bells around her ankles. I couldn't help but notice how shapely her legs were, almost like a young girl's. Her stomach was bare, not the firmest, but nothing to dwell on. Just a normal, slightly bulging belly. I've had worse, right? She was wearing a long skirt or a piece of cloth wrapped around her hips. Nice thighs, by the way. Instead of outerwear, she was wearing a bra adorned with beads and rhinestones. I raised my arms and swayed to the beat of the music, twirling, bouncing. My eyes sparkled. I felt something. A small spark of excitement. After all, the woman in front of me was not lacking in sensuality. And I was a man. The switch clicked on by itself. My mother-in-law gestured for me to join her, urging me on with her hands. I gave in to the temptation. Leaning toward her, I held out my hand. She stepped closer and began to shake her belly in front of me. Surprisingly, it was very mesmerizing. I couldn't resist and kissed her navel. She jabbed her finger at me, warning me not to cross the line, but to appreciate the performance. I complied. She seemed to want to have a little fun with me. I'm not your average guy either. And that's not all. She screamed with happiness, and in one motion, like a magician, pulled her skirt off. I was at a loss for what to do. It was completely unexpected. You see, my mother-in-law has incredibly beautiful legs. At one time, she even participated in beauty contests and won awards. You can't have less long and shapely legs to participate in such contests. Even at the age of 58, her legs were as young as ever. I had never paid attention to her legs before, but now I couldn't help but notice. She quickly put on her high-heeled shoes and spun around again. My mind went blank. I hadn't expected her to be so carefree. I thought maybe her bra was about to come off, but it didn't. She danced around watching my reaction, and I began to feel humiliated. I was stunned by her behavior towards me all show, no touching. I got up from the couch and walked toward her, and she retreated to the back of the room. I took another step, and she stepped back again. That's how we ended up in her spacious bed. We even had a little wrestling match, but it was all a lot of fun. To my surprise, her shoes flew up and hit the ceiling, and the rest of her things hung from the chandelier. I used to think that only happened in movies, but it turns out that life can be just as unpredictable sometimes. Naturally, we were both confused. I clutched my head, thinking of my wife. My mother-in-law, however, remained calm. She leisurely brushed her hair, dressed comfortably in her home clothes, and folded her dance outfit neatly. Eventually, we remembered the washing machine. To our relief, there was nothing wrong with it, and it was working properly. We pulled out the laundry and checked the spin quality. "Well, thank you, son-in-law. my mother-in-law said, pointing her finger toward the door. Once again, I felt a little resentful. It would have been nice if she had said goodbye to me more affectionately, perhaps with a kiss or a hug. Instead, she became aloof and stern, like a snow queen. As I walked home, I couldn't help but ponder the behavior of women at this age. Why do they pursue men? What's going on with them? And why do they only choose young men? Are they trying to revive their desires, or are they taking revenge on their daughters? Why do they have so much untapped passion? Their shyness disappears, and their life principles seem to disappear. I decided to visit her the next day and prove who would have the last word. A little nervous, I nevertheless pressed the doorbell. My mother-in-law went wide-eyed when she opened the door. "You?" she exclaimed, taking a step back. "Are you the one who arranged for the renovation?" I asked in a firm tone, entering the hallway. In an instant, I grabbed her, picked her up, and carried her back to her original spot. She resisted briefly, quickly giving up and joining in the fun. This time it was exciting. Toward the end, I was even exhausted and panting like a wild animal. Honestly, her legs were driving me crazy. I had never seen such amazingly long legs before. I couldn't take my eyes off them. My wife's legs are fine, but my mother-in-law's legs are gorgeous. I got up, dressed confidently, and headed home. She tried to stop me, but I ignored her pleas. I am a firm believer that when someone says no, they mean no. As a man, I believe I have the right to make my own decisions. I didn't even bother to say goodbye. A few days later, I received a message on my phone with a heart emoji. It read, "The washing machine is broken. Can you help me fix it?" I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. She always wants more. However, I couldn't help but miss her long legs, and I won't deny that. I quickly packed up and grabbed my tools, trying not to make eye contact with her. I arrived at my mother-in-law's house, and to my surprise, she was ready to dance. She stood, fully prepared, waiting for an appreciative audience. Once again, she was wearing only a bra, a one-button skirt, and bare feet. I couldn't help myself and fell on the bed. She danced with such intensity and passion that it was mesmerizing. Honestly, I couldn't take my eyes off her feet. There was a lot to admire. Surprisingly, the broken washing machine was not even discussed. 2 days later, the mother-in-law called her daughter again to make me come over and show me how to use the washing machine again. What a mother-in-law, I thought once again. What happens to her when she is about to satisfy her hunger? I made a very unhappy face because I have to go almost every day to her mother, who can't handle simple things. And my mind was already spinning with thoughts of my mother-in-law performing belly dance for me once again. I collected the tool again so that my wife did not suspect anything, and went to my mother-in-law, enjoy her legs, and not only. Yes, women at that age are very sexy. They want to have a lot of fun.